my great pleasure to welcome Ralph Singleton, Tim Williams and Brent Trelaw, all of whom work for the Cornwall City Investment Fund. Thank you very much for your time, and we've got some great questions, and hopefully people have got the ability to pop up on the chat box with questions if they've got anything over the next 45 minutes or so that we can put to you, team, and you can answer for us. Just a bit of context for people tuning in. We were very fortunate in Cornwall that we were identified as being in need of British Business Bank support, and they put out a tender process some couple of years or so ago, and FSE Group won the contract to manage the fund in Cornwall, and thence was born the now famous Cornwall and Isles City Investment Fund. And I will not be going COISIF or anything else for the rest of the morning. I'm just going to call it the fund from now on, Ralph, if that's okay. And that was born for a most exciting opportunity. I mean, Cornwall, alongside the Midlands and the North, then was identified as in need of this equity and debt funding, and I was very excited, amongst others, was really keen and have been a very keen advocate of everything that you're doing over the last couple of years or so, and it puts Cornwall at the forefront, and I think it's really beholden on not just you at the fund, but all of us in the Cornwall business scene to make sure that we do use this fund here in the most amazing ways to really accelerate Cornwall up the properly funded, the productive and clear-thinking future economy that we want it to be. And I think that's we can all work together in that. And I'm looking forward to this morning to try and sort of get some principles that we can go forward with from what your team can do, what you need us at the Chamber and the wider business community to do to make sure that we really use this fund in the most brilliant way for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly over the coming years, and obviously with elements of it being evergreen, that it's put back in for, you know, additions to our economy which are going to sort of be here and form the, as I say, the sort of 21st century things like perhaps tech-driven and renewable energy and sustainable tourism that we really want Cornwall to look at. So I think that's enough intro from me. I understand from Tim and Brent that you're leading this, Ralph, so thank you very much for that. So I don't know whether you just want to give a little bit of intro yourselves, and then I'll come in with the questions.
Okay. In terms of our personalities, you mean, or in terms of what the fund is all about?
Well, I think just what the fund is all about and what you do, and just in the context of, you know, how your ambitions and optimism are that it can most help Cornwall. Okay.
Well, I think Brent, who is in charge of the slides, very kindly put up the first key slide there, which is to say that this is a £40 million fund, which is aimed at supporting growth businesses in the Cornish economy, and that word growth is quite important, both in terms of the debt side and the equity side. For the debt side, to work for us and the companies, the companies that we will lend to will need to be growing quite strongly, and on the equity side, you need good growth, because at the end of the day, the fund will need some sort of exit by the time of the closure of the fund in some 8 years' time now, and so that is more easily achieved with businesses achieving above average rates of growth. So it's looking to support the ambitious growing SMEs in the area. It's looking to create jobs in the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly area. We're also looking to bring in matched investment, both on the debt and the equity side, interestingly. I think we've probably been quite successful on both there. On some of the debt deals, we've matched up with some other equity investors, and on the equity side, we've brought in already more than we've invested ourselves alongside the fund. So that's been quite positive. and we're quite keen to sort of continue to work with this sort of wider finance community in Cornwall. For the main reason, it's a word you mentioned earlier. It's the word evergreen. I'm a passionate investor and love helping companies out and helping them grow and seeing them grow. And if we can achieve that, then this fund, which is coming via ERDF and British Business Bank, will leave an evergreen fund for the greater good of the Cornish economy, and that's very much our aim in doing this. So the types of investment we're going to be making are businesses we want to have a high degree of certainty in succeeding, to be able to leave that legacy for the future. Tim, I don't know whether you wanted to add a bit more on that.
Yeah, Tim and Brent, just introduce yourselves and add anything you wish.
Yeah, morning. Tim Williams here. I look after the debt side of the portfolio, and just building on what Ralph briefly said there. I think everyone in the fund has two kind of passions. One is that we all live in Cornwall and work here and choose it as our place to grow up, big families, and live here. Is such a great place. But also, we're all passionate about seeing businesses be successful, seeing SMEs grow. So the Cornwall RC Investment Fund kind of brings the both of those together to be able to help support the ambitious and growing SMEs and promote Cornwall at the same time.
Fabulous.
Good morning, everyone. Brent Trelaw here. I'm the business development manager for the fund. So critically, it's my job to get out amongst the business community and identify the best leads that we can find. And not really much more to add to what Ralph already said, but we're looking for the most ambitious, fastest growing and highest value businesses that we can identify.
Just one final point. Just one final point, if I may, Kim, in terms of the types of companies the sort of the fund is looking for. History has suggested that pre-revenue businesses are generally quite unsuccessful in terms of their investment returns. So we're not very keen at doing pre-revenue businesses, and also in terms of the stage where a company may be in terms of its product development. We need them to have met this sort of minimum viable product stage, MVP stage, and perhaps achieve the very early stages of achieving some revenue. And I'm not talking about achieving millions of revenue, and it could be a few £1,000s of the revenue, but we do need to see some signs that they've achieved some traction to give us some confidence of them achieving success in the future.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you've already covered a lot there, actually. Can I just ask you a little bit more from a Cornwall business point of view, so that Mirren, our membership manager at the Chamber of Commerce, who's here this morning at this webinar, and myself, can best spread the news across the scheme. When it comes to match funding, is the emphasis on the business owner, him or herself, to find other sources of that, or have you got access to sort of match partners that you can introduce into businesses like that?
Yeah, can happen either way. We're happy if companies come with match funding already in place. We can work with crowdfunding sites as a cornerstone investor, although we generally like to be referred to as a regional fund rather than actually specifying which fund it is, but I'm sure they can all work that one out. We've worked well with our own angel network. We've worked with a private family wealth office on one deal. The deal I've just completed a couple of weeks ago, where you'll see some publicity due in the next week or so, that came with an existing investor who put more money into the company in other funds and another angel group. We've also worked with two institutional investors on one particular deal, which were connections with ourselves, and I've also just shown them one of those two institutions, one of the deals which we are about to go through legal process. So every which way really on that one.
Yeah, okay, yeah, great. So I've got a list of questions that people have sent in advance. So what was the main mandate for the fund? I mean, is there a sort of ideal client? You've described that it needs to have some revenue track record already. Is there a size of sort of equity investment that suits the fund perfectly, Ralph, do you think?
What are we looking for? We want to see a good product or service. We want to see an excellent management team to deliver that, the success of that product or that service. Then it's a question of then helping them along the way in terms of delivering that. I think Brent's put some slides up there. There's a mixture of new technologies, existing technologies, service businesses in the market. So the mandate really is to be investing in growth companies for the longer term benefit of the Cornish economy.
Okay. And how did you feel? I mean, you're very experienced, all of you actually, but Ralph particularly from other parts of the world. How had the delivery of the fund out into the business community been progressing pre-COVID? Sort of on track for what you would have expected before the start of this fund?
If we look pre-COVID, at the end of March, which takes into some COVID stuff, we were about 55% of where we should have been. And at the beginning of March, we were anticipating that by the end of June that we would have caught back up on track with the delivery schedule of the fund. Now COVID's clearly impacted that. So it's been a little bit slower than we would like. I think there have been a number of factors behind that. I think there's a extensive support culture in Cornwall, which is very positive. And to some extent, the fund was coming in on top of that, so it was trying to work out the positioning of the fund in relation to the sort of the existing grant schemes that are around, the existing startup loan schemes that are around, and then perhaps secondly, in terms of deal completions, have been a little bit slower than we'd liked, as certainly on the equity side, the companies get used to the sort of the legal requirements that a commercial fund like ourselves requires.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there hadn't been, I feel, a huge track record of equity investment for growth in Cornwall. I mean, perhaps that was, you've heard me say this before, the 20th century sort of ways of doing business pre-internet didn't really suit Cornwall very well. And there seemed to be a sort of lack of confidence here, perhaps, that you could use equity investment in order to really accelerate the growth of a business. So I suppose the first year or so there was quite a bit of sort of education to do, as well as actually doing what you thought you were doing, which was getting the funds out, was there?
Yeah, that's certainly the case, and we got 4 deals out fairly quickly, and then it just I think we've been working on the pipeline before delivering. Then there was a little bit of a delay as sort of the next bunch of companies have come along. We've made the fifth company, and we've got 3 more deals that should complete by the end of June in terms of the equity side. But it has taken a lot of education, both on the equity side and the debt side. Tim, do you want to say a little bit more about the education on the debt side?
Yeah, sure. So the debts provision is, we're there as a market gap funder. And in the last sort of 24 months since the fund's been there's been large changes in the debt market. Funders coming and going, changing appetites by lenders against various backdrops of economic uncertainty. So we've gone through initial Brexit problems, general election, and now obviously the COVID crisis. So the market gap can often move, but essentially the fund is there to deploy in the businesses that either can't get bank funding because they're potentially projection-led early stage growth, and possibly where the alternative finance fintech market isn't working because it often needs some sort of asset backing. So and likewise, then we've got to counter that with that it's a commercial fund, and we're trying to make sure that we pitch it in terms of risk and return where it sort of belongs in that spectrum of getting finance. So pre-COVID crisis, we've been good. We've engaged with a lot of businesses. We spent a lot of time delivering support and finding the overall funding package, whether that's grants, as with Ralph, and equity. A lot goes back and forth between the two sides of the fund, and also what other support's out there from the other ERDF and support providers. So it's a lot of trying to source where our product can best suit if the other solutions aren't there. And early 2020, we see a lot of progress on that. We saw a lot of businesses with kind of some real certainty, some real confidence, and we're looking to deliver their growth plans. And then clearly, obviously, we were very busy in that January, February part into March, and since then it's obviously had a considerable slowdown as a lot of businesses putting growth in their pipeline.
The next question I had here, Tim, actually was, so how COVID has affected the demand. I mean, I suppose that's that survey that the COVID-19 Working Party, 92% of Cornwall's businesses are adversely impacted. So I suppose that would mirror your findings. It's got to be roughly the same across, I suppose, potential deals that you had coming up, was it?
Yeah, definitely. As one would expect, you're going to see a slowdown in business applying for growth debt when growth isn't necessarily the highest priority, and surviving the crisis and lockdown and putting resources in place to go through that has been obviously very key for a lot of businesses. And it's clear that the combined effects of the schemes and measures out there for businesses, furlough, grants, deferments on rents, HMRC, other catchable repayment holidays from lenders, are all helping businesses considerably. And that's before then they look at the funding packages that the government and Rishi Sunak put in place. So C-bills and more latterly, and hopefully so successfully, the bounce back loans, providing good opportunity to access funding relatively easily and relatively cheaply for a lot of businesses. And so both established steady state growth businesses and high growth businesses will be best placed to, best suited to get that money straight away. So it's right, the businesses need to take the funding and the support out there first to survive that, and then as we start to move through the unlocking of the COVID issues, to agree with, see where that market gap fits and what we can do to help businesses grow. But in the short term, it has undoubtedly made a bit of an impact.
Yeah, and let's hope, as Brent was saying before we sort of formally started, that let's hope that businesses are more resilient than they perhaps even think themselves are, and that they can come out of this and get back on track fairly quickly, and then hopefully. With perhaps the shock that this has been to the system and the changes in business behaviour, the desire to be more resilient for the future, perhaps, will mean that the fund can, again, take that upturn quite quickly. In Cornwall, as you referred to, Ralph, in your intro, we've got a real advantage. We've had these years of EU support, but that has, in some pockets of the economy, created a sort of expectation, a grant culture, a fairly easy culture. Has that, two parts to this question really, has that played down the ability of some business owners to understand what you're offering? And a question that's come in on the chat room from Ian Sutcliffe: how can you work with beyond the financial aspects, sort of around strategic planning, product development, sales skills, and developing progress with a business? Or is that something that you use partners to do? So two parts. I mean, has the EU sort of walked the type of demand that you'd normally expect to see in a region? And what can you do as we become more familiar with seeing you here to help the wider aspects of business growth?
Okay, I'll answer this in part first, and then perhaps Brent can come in because he's got perhaps more experience than I have of the ecosystem in Cornwall. I think there were some delays initially. I think it'd be let's say a little bit wrong. Maybe you could compare it the way I'm about to compare it, but it felt from somebody who's now living full time down here and enjoying the economy that the Cornish companies had perhaps benefited from the, in some cases, from the grant drug, as it were, and become addicted to it. And in some ways, when those grants run out, companies need to look about what the next future is, and to some extent, that's what the fund is all about. And Brent will come on to talk to you about how he's working with some of the the organisations which do provide grants and why they can become investment propositions for us. You also made the point about how we can help that beyond finance. We've got a very experienced team down here. I've worked in the London stock market for 30 odd years and got quite a few contacts with people who've run PLCs at chief executive and finance director level, who have a great love for Cornwall, may even live full time down in Cornwall now, and very much want to help put their skill sets to good use in the economy. So we're not averse to introducing people to those people with those skill sets to help them to help them run their businesses more effectively, and produce the targets and aspirations they want to achieve themselves.
Okay, good. So, do you have anything to add to what Ralph said there about the sort of ecosystem, grant culture, good and bad, that has been here for 20 years now, hasn't it?
Yeah, almost 25 years. Well, it must be, because I started in this game, I think, in '96. So there was definitely some grants around then. And I think, a couple of things there I could add, really. One is back to this seed capital and scale-up capital. And the purpose of our funds is definitely the scale-up side of the fence. Our job is to take commercially viable ideas and then help those businesses exploit them. So I think there's been, what Cornwall's very good at with the grant funds is to concentrate on the seed level development. And I think there's a message from Joe and from ATI, where we work really closely with organisations like that, where the product development, the MVP development stuff can be done before it gets to us. And then when it gets to us, our funds then can take the maximum advantage of that concept. It's already market proven, it's got a few customers, and then we can really set fire to the business, which I think is what this fund is designed for. But of course, in the market where Cornwall has had 25 years of predominantly grant support, it is difficult for businesses to get their heads around the fact that there's a slight difference with this fund. I think the LEP understand it perfectly well, that we're there to leverage up the growth and not to pre-stimulate the growth. That's dangerous for the fund in as much that we're taking commercial risks with unproven ideas.
Right. And the screen you've got up there now, and thank you for getting up some of the appropriate slides that you, as we've been going through. But you've got up there then some really some of your success stories. These are some of the, I think, iconic businesses in Cornwall over the last couple of years that you've really helped. So these are your stars, I guess, here, and they are presumably happy if they're happy for you to use their names. Then I guess they're in most cases, I find in Cornwall, happy to give a little bit of help and inspiration to other businesses, I guess, as well as what you guys can do.
Yeah, very much so. I think in total there are I think 21 companies in the portfolio now, and there's 3 more equity deals due to complete by the end of June, and I think probably 2 debt deals which complete by the end of June as well. So that's heading up towards 30 pretty quickly. So we're very pleased to be involved with all those companies. And just to give you some ideas there in terms of Fibre CRM, we introduced them to a chairman who was an ex-finance director of 3 quoted companies. We were involved in the process for one of the non-execs for Wildernet, which is our first investment there, which we see as perhaps some enabling technology for all the other companies we're going to invest in, because that's all about providing super fast or even gigabit broadband as we go on. So hopefully we'll be all looking forward to benefit from their services in the future.
Well, I was having a conversation with Ian Calvert the other day. I think they're having a good war, aren't they? They're one of the ones that are actually benefiting as people work more and more from home and realise that their super fast broadband isn't quite up to scratch. I think Wildernet are really coming into their own, aren't they now? Yeah, Wildernet. Yeah, good. So going on through the questions that came in advance, Ralph, what are the immediate impacts you are seeing with existing clients caused by the crisis? So that slide that Brent's put up there was up there a few moments ago. I mean, it is tough, but there'll be winners like Wildernet and losers like most businesses, obviously, at the moment. Are you seeing any changes in business people's behaviour yet, which might help or hinder the growth of the fund afterwards?
I think we're speaking to the companies very regularly, and it's probably weekly in many cases. Certainly on the equity side, they're all taking the measures that they can take, or they feel it's sensible to take in relation to their own business, and it varies. As you said, you've got businesses like like Wildernet, which are actually probably seeing a slight improvement in their outlook post this, but then you've seen others which are not being helped. So something like Clinical Designs, which is trying to install new technology into GP surgeries. Clearly, the GP surgeries aren't particularly keen to have them anywhere near their surgeries at the moment. Yeah. So it's affecting people in different ways. And a lot of the debt portfolio, whilst not necessarily being in perhaps the tourism industry or otherwise, is probably a byproduct of them supplying services to that industry. And clearly, if all their customers have suddenly not achieving any revenue, they can't then go on and use the services provided by the companies in that portfolio. So I think they've all been hit by that. They've all probably furloughed as many people as they feel they can without destroying the business. The majority have probably taken on the bounce back business loans. Some of them have taken CBILS loans. I suspect most of them have delayed VAT payments and taken property rental holidays and the like. So we've been working through them to make sure they get themselves into the fittest position possible to one, survive, and then perhaps two, to start accelerating out the other side.
Yeah, and how are you finding? As you say, you've all got colleagues from other parts of the world. How are your concerns for business resilience in Cornwall, do you think, compared with elsewhere? I mean, we are a less, because we didn't grow in the 20th century like other areas, we are less robust in that sense. We've got lower productivity and lower wages. Does that in a sense give us some power that our expectations of when a crisis comes along like this, we are more resilient, or is that going to really hold us back in the sectors that you've invested in and would hope to invest in the future? Is this crisis really going to have a less or a more impact than elsewhere in the world, do you reckon?
I think it's probably different. I think Tim and I sat in on a meeting with BBB the other day, and they were asked one question by our chief executives as to how the Northern Powerhouse and the Midlands Engine are finding things, and and they're struggling for different reasons. Some of those areas are very dependent on the aerospace industry, which is looks like it's going to be is going to struggle for the next couple of years. I can't see too many people wanting to be stuck very close to 350 people or whatever an airliner takes nowadays. For 5 hours to get across, or 7 hours, whatever it is, to get across the US. Yeah. So, I think they're impacted in a different way. But one of the things we are, the fund can now do, there were some excluded sectors because it was an ERDF fund. We are now able to look at more hospitality and more retail sectors. So the fund is perhaps in a slightly better position to be able to help some of the businesses which predominate in Cornwall. I think there's some estimates that tourism is somewhere between 25 and 28% of business down here, and it's probably even higher than that when you take into all the other companies which supply it, but might be categorised in another way. It could be as high as 50%, I suspect, in reality.
Yeah.
Tim, anything else you wanted to add on that?
I think I could come in there and say that post-crisis, I think the three pillars of what I see, the three pillars of Cornish economy is tourism and hospitality, farming, agriculture, and fishing. I think is a really good, strong foundation for the economy to move forward from. And I think also what we've done exceptionally well over the last 20 odd years is to build up more of the higher value, smaller sector, but at much higher value. We've got excellent business services. We've got great skills in our manufacturing sector. And we're seeing through the investment in the universities and the innovation programs, we're seeing a really strong wave of innovation-led products and services coming out of these programs. So I think we will be well placed. We have a lot of small businesses that although they might be weak in terms of cash, they will be fleet of foot and nimble in adapting to whatever what I'm calling the next normal, but everyone else is calling the new normal, what that might look like post-COVID.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's a whole interesting discussion around how this is going to change business behaviours. And even if we look at tourism and agriculture, what will be considered sustainable and realistic going forwards, as with renewable energy, for example. And of all the conversations I've had with our business partners at Cornwall Chamber of Commerce over the last few weeks, the most distraught one of all has been Heathrow Airport, and they are seeing it, at the next normal, as you say, Brent, being very different and being 8 to 10 years away, and the third runway. John Holland Kay, the chief executive of Heathrow Airport, saying it's now a 15-year project, whereas they were hoping, all the excitement of just last October, which seems like a different world now, doesn't it? When they got the go-ahead, that it was a sort of 5 or 7 year project. So it'll be interesting to see how that industry, which is definitely, as you say, Ralph, and the components for aeroplanes and all the attendant industries that go around that, how that's going to be impacted. And if we can, in Cornwall, because we haven't been so wrapped up in some of those, arguably unsustainable things, if we can go forward with sustainable tourism, with renewable energy, with farming and fishing done in different ways, which I think we have the skills here to do, we could really benefit from this if the world of business generally, finance and business support agrees that those are the ways forward. I guess it's quite an interesting and big discussion, I think, isn't it, as to be had as to how we come out of this. But,
I think you're right there.
I think there's, in Cornwall, we've got a lot of, as you said, very small businesses, but what they're very good at is adapting and surviving in a changing world. They know how to be fleet of foot, as Brent said, and they know what to do to be successful again. So that, in terms of concern for resilience, I don't think in terms of the entrepreneur, I'd have any concerns about them adapting to whatever the new next, whatever you're calling it, normal is like. But I think the clearest problem will be is liquidity as they try and get into that stage over the next 6 months. As we come out of lots of schemes, furlough and VAT deferment and HMRC deferment and rent holidays and councils, there's going to be a starting up of supply chains and paying full wages again. That's going to put a lot of strain on businesses that would have used their cash reserves. So I think it's probably an opportunity for Cornwall that they can move quickly as a business and adapt to what's coming, but it will need them to plan how they're going to do that and be prepared, and that needs to happen. And a lot of our businesses, you said, what are they doing now? So many of them are doing that. They're starting to talk about what their pivot looks like and what their alternative income looks like, and what that potentially means for the cash flow over the next 6 months. And does that mean working on terms of trade or working clarity with other suppliers and other businesses, or does it mean taking on growth funding, or definitely does it take on a bounce back loan now when things are looking good? So it's all about preparing what they're going to do in that new next normal now, so that so they're not caught short when the opportunity comes.
I think we need to get that message out loud and clear. For two reasons. As a business person, a previous business owner myself, use this time when you've got a bit more time on your hands, perhaps, to get those plans, do some scenario planning, make your business more resilient, talk to people like you and get advice where it exists, which is plentiful in Cornwall. And I see Joe Hancock from ATI has just joined the chat room with some answers to Richard. There are plenty of schemes here where you can get really cracking advice. And also as a business person, there is such a thing as the zeitgeist, but I don't think really things happen in an individual business unless you've got a plan to do it. They don't just happen by accident. Somebody needs to put in a plan of how it's going to happen. And I think now is the time to put those plans in place and make sure that we are best place, I think, in Cornwall for the next normal. I think the 21st century will be our time to shine. The 20th century, where you mass-produced, homogenised products and we were distant from markets and that sort of thing, didn't really suit us. But I think some of the new opportunities we've got play absolutely into Cornwall's hands, and I think we've got to make sure that we're using all of the expertise that's available to do that. And
I think there were also a couple of two macro things which I think are going to help Cornwall and the UK economy post-COVID. One is going to be, we've all worked out that being reliant on imports for various things is going to be difficult. So I think you're going to see a lot more onshoring of services back. And we've already seen it on one company in Cornwall in the electronics sector, which has suddenly seen a significant rise in their inquiry levels for their products, which had previously been bought in from overseas. And then the aspect which I think could help Cornwall more dramatically is the use of technology as we're using now. Where would you like to work from home from, in Cornwall or stuck in smelly London?
Yeah. I hope that doesn't excite too much conversation on the chat room. Nobody's sworn at you yet. No, that's fine. But no, absolutely fair point. I mean, I think that as I've been saying to lots of people, the now that remote working, I said to the Western Morning News last week, thought already now of me driving 3 hours to Bristol for a 2-hour meeting and 3 hours back again seems absolutely ludicrous, doesn't it? Yes, if it was a new client or something, you would do that. But to have a meeting with people that you know seems a daft thing to do already. So there will be huge benefits, I think. You
put it rather more eloquently than I have.
Well, only an example which I've been thinking about that used to happen quite, would take a whole day almost to get there, which is ridiculous, isn't it? Looking forward to the other questions here. Are you able to assist businesses suffering from the sort of working capital or investment gap that the current crisis might come along? I don't know whether the question I had in mind existing clients or whether people are coming to you as a source of sort of support in troubled times, but just talk around that a bit, Ralph. Is obviously we're seeing some, particularly in the tourism, hospitality, leisure, culture businesses, no working capital and no investor really would be attracted to them at the moment. What is there anything that you can point them in the direction of?
Well, certainly we are supporting our existing portfolio companies in many different ways. There'll be some that will perhaps ask for capital repayment holidays, and they'll be considered on a case-by-case basis. And there is a significant proportion of the debt portfolio that's taking advantage of that at the moment. The equity portfolio, 2 of the 5 deals are into follow-on rounds to continue their growth. In fact, the cash that they raised didn't go out any more quickly, because of COVID, but it just happened to be that they got to their sort of 18-month time period at about the time when COVID was hitting. So there's more funding happening for those companies, and we're working with the co-shareholders there. And that's another interesting point about having matched funding. If you've got matched funding, you've got co-investors on board, you can get together as a team and continue to help the company. So that's been quite positive. Tim, I don't know whether you want to say a little bit more from your side on that.
Yeah, so in terms of that working capital and investment gap, certainly, Coisiv's there to help those businesses that are looking to, as you said, there, bounce back, Kim, and grow, sort that out. And, Brent's probably our best placed person to speak to, but we always say, speak and plan early. Come and speak to Coisiv and your advisors and your team around you about identifying what you want, and then by engaging with the likes of Brent and Ralph and myself, you will also get the aspect that we'll be able to have an early discussion and point you, identify areas where we think you might need to build your business plan or your forecasts around to be able to attract finance, and be that from us or or wider in the marketplace. We have good contacts to be able to help you do that. So it's definitely, we can definitely help with that, but it's definitely about speaking and planning early, and having that proper discussion with advisors rather than, as you pointed out, Kim, just trying to do it on an ad hoc basis.
I think, well, I could add to that by saying that our mission is to help small businesses raise the finance that they need. That need not necessarily be our fund. So we do an awful lot. I think the last time we looked, we'd signposted well over 50 businesses to £7 million of alternative funding that wasn't related to Coisiv. So we're willing to, and we have fielded about 25 to 30 inquiries relating to COVID-19 and we've signposted those businesses out to what I think is probably the most appropriate sort of funding. So I think we play a wider role in the ecosystem down here of signposting and helping businesses become investment ready, even if it's not necessarily us as the final solution.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great to have you at the heart of that, and so all of you well connected. That the tentacles spread out very well from the fund out to all those other sources. And Joe's again making a point on the chat room that ATI is there for those sort of pre-revenue businesses, and Richard's making the point on the chat room that we haven't mentioned mining, Cornish lithium, geothermal, obviously huge opportunities for Cornwall. Are there other USPs, somebody asks, that you are seeing in the Cornwall economy that give confidence for the future? You've discussed some of those already. Are there some other, have we got some other star sectors or star people here that are going to be, that we can hold up, all of us hold up as shining lights coming out of recession, and then, you know, for the economies of the next 30, 50 years that we've got here in Cornwall? Can you, in your dreams, do you have some hopes around some sectors or people that we can do that?
I would say there's some things I've been very pleasantly surprised about is the strength of the tech industry down here. I think that's been very positive, and we've seen some great investments there. I guess the marine side is probably more well known about, but again, there's still lots of very progressive companies with new technologies that we're looking at the moment. I think there's 3 or 4 in that sector in the current pipeline. And I think Richard mentions the sort of the mining industry there. That's an interesting sector to be invested in due to sort of Cornwall's heritage. Whether this fund is the right fund for it, I think you need very deep pockets for a lot of mining projects. I think it's more likely that we will find investments in the supply sector to that industry, and I'd be more than happy to look at any businesses in that sector. But investing in a mine per se, I think you need very deep pockets.
Very deep pockets, as Jeremy Ruffle of Cornish Lithium's already finding. But Joe from ATI is offering there to Richard to certainly for a bit of seed corn funding to explore an idea. Richard, ATI is a very good. I sit on the advisory board for the ATI, and it's an excellent scheme to put to them. And your idea can be explored by some really knowledgeable people before then coming back to the fund here for future funding, if it's as Ralph was saying earlier, sort of proved its minimum viable product credentials. So plenty of layered help in Cornwall. Yeah.
The one sector I forgot to mention again, Kim, was we've seen 2 or 3 good med tech companies down here as well. So one helping loneliness in the elderly, one medical device business, and one a bit of software which would potentially make hospitals more efficient.
Yeah, they're small at the moment, aren't they? But let's again, this crisis could have just sort of skyrocketed the understanding that health and health tech and remote solutions are going to be absolutely the one of the ways in which humanity can move forward. So I do think those sectors can come out of this with their credentials enhanced quite a bit, actually. So let's hope Cornwall can. I mean, that was one of the sectors that the LEP identified that we had a particular affinity. And what I liked largely about what we've been talking about this morning, and most of those LEP 10 opportunities, they felt very correct in the Cornish psyche, didn't they? There were things in the 20th century that didn't sit well, and therefore Cornwall didn't benefit from. But when it comes to renewable energy, health tech, mining, agri-tech, these are sustainable tourism. These are things I think most people in Cornwall have some affinity with, and hopefully we can grow with the help of the fund and our own inclination to really take advantage of those things as we go forward.
I've got some stats here on the LEP sector strategy, Kim. Of the 10 sectors, I think we've already got investments or lent money to 6 of them. And then in the immediate pipeline, i.e. for delivery by the end of September, we cover all the other sectors with 1 or more companies. And so the only sector we're struggling to find anything in the very short term, which we think is investable for the, in terms of our risk profile and longer term benefit of the fund, is actually the mining industry. So I'd love to find something in that sector.
That's of a size that you can cope with your fund alongside other things. Yeah, that's interesting. And has that you perhaps haven't looked at the stats from this perspective, but are there sectors which you think the LET in retrospect should have looked at? Are there things that you're finding hungry for your investment that weren't on those LET 10 opportunities? Construction, for example.
We've seen a few construction product businesses around the place, some quite innovative products. I think some of the problems with the construction industry is the way it's set up, that it's quite difficult to get those products accepted by the market and properly qualified so they can be used effectively. So it takes rather longer to achieve that than perhaps it does in some other industries.
Okay. And we're getting near the time now, but have there been constraints that you think people listening this morning to this webinar and others can help you spread the word to ease in Cornwall? Have there been things that have held you back, either that surprised or that there was a lack of appetite in certain size or type of business which not depresses you, but sort of constrains the ability to get the fund out and working for them?
I think possibly people were sceptical as whether we could achieve our match funding for the equity investments. I think we're proving that we can do that at the moment. I say we've just completed another deal. We've got 3 more complete by the end of June. So hopefully we'll be starting to put that one to bed. I think possibly some of the things that affected the fund were perhaps I'm not sure early on whether the fund remit was properly conveyed. And Brent raised it on a couple of times that this is gap funding, this is growth funding, and that's what it's all about. With the fund hasn't been set up to cure the sort of the funding gap that many would believe is in the pre-revenue and pre-product completion phases, which is another point. And to some extent, the likes of Innovate are trying to solve those problems there, and other grant organisations. So I think it's that aspect that we will look at businesses that one are growing, but that could be a more mature business. I know somebody came up to me 6 months ago and said, "Oh, I didn't realise you could do a mature business that was suddenly going to perhaps pivot and to come up with a new product or change its direction and suddenly change from being perhaps a mature, slow growth company to being a fast growth company." So we can look at that as well.
That's great. Well, in the last few minutes, all 3 of you, are there anything that you'd like to add to, I guess, as much to not only to demonstrate your expertise, but actually to use the people listening here who are looking at the names are quite a well-connected bunch? Anything that we can help get your messages out? Because I'm really keen, as I say, that this fund, we are fortunate to have it in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. I want to make sure that we really get the most impact from it, and as quickly as possible, and that we use the shock that this crisis has been to actually come out of that in different and new ways. And I'd just like to ask you just for a minute or so each before we finish to just impart your thoughts and wisdom about how that can best be done for us in Cornwall.
Brent, do you want to kick off from the fund's point of view?
Yeah, I think our strategy in deploying the money over the life of the program is to make sure. I think the real tragedy would be that we miss an opportunity. So we can't support everything. Some projects are just too large or perhaps too risky for us. But I think what we are encouraging is to have very early conversations with businesses so that we can get them onto the radar. And I think at the end of the program, perhaps in 7 or 8 years' time, I think the success would be looking back and saying, well, we didn't miss any opportunities where we could have made a difference.
That's very good, and we all ought to remember that, and actually, with all our networks, make sure that we don't miss any opportunities. That would be awful for Cornwall, wouldn't it? Going forward into this, as I say, this period, I think we're coming into our own. We just don't want to miss opportunities, and all of us have a role to play in that, I think. Tim, anything to add?
Yeah, very, very similar to what Brent said there. I think it's engage and speak to us early, because we have such a pragmatic view of, what a business can achieve, and what its, what its owners and its management can achieve. So we're very open to either investing early or shaping the deal or signposting it if necessary to be able to invest later on. So yeah, it's definitely making sure that we don't, as Brent said, there miss opportunities by just speaking to us about all sorts.
I think one of the messages that we were trying to get over earlier in the year was where the fund is positioned on the debt side, and I think Tim mentioned it earlier that the fund is aimed at providing debt funding to organisations that perhaps can't get it from their bank now. Traditional banks will perhaps lend up to 9% for the higher risk end of their scale. I know there's been some criticism that the fund's rates are somewhat high, but if that's where the banks end, that's where we start, because we're taking the higher level of risk, and this is a commercial fund, and we want to keep that fund for the good of Cornwall. We don't want to be charging very low rates of interest and then having companies go bust on us, and you end up with no funds to return back to Cornwall. So we're trying to run it as a commercial fund for the greater longer term good of Cornwall.
And you might, on that point, Ralph or Tim, just mention how you work alongside SWIG.
Yes, SWIG are mandated by us to provide loans up to $250,000. So that's between 25,000 and $250,000, and they'll do it from that side. And they will also co-lend in that. So that's where some of the match funding coming in. So you're getting some bigger bang for your bucks there, and you're also getting some experience of people who've been on the ground for many years. Tim, do you want to add to that?
No, that's very apt. Yeah, SWIG are our partner in lending from 25,000 to 250, but we work across as a single team. So united front in the market, and when we look at deals, so it's a really good partnership that has been really, really beneficial for the fund.
Good. And just a couple of quick questions, when Richard and Clive are asking, do you look at commercial? Will you invest in commercial property? Have you looked at the healthcare sector at all?
Commercial property, no. And I think there's another question about mining finance companies. We can't do finance companies or companies providing finance, if I can phrase it that way. Healthcare, I think we've got some loans in that sector already, haven't we, Tim?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, so healthcare is a sector we can look at. There needs to be a good, usual strong proposition and have some differentiating factors, but there's certainly an opportunity to look at things.
So there you are, Clive. If you're get in touch with Brent, and we'll see where we go. So look, that sort of wraps it up. Thank you very much indeed. That's been very insightful. I've really enjoyed it. It's inspired me again to work with businesses that the Chamber of Commerce comes into contact with. Just I know that Mirren, membership manager, and I have been listening intently to what you've been saying. We'll be able to go out and spread that word. I think it's great to have Joe Hancock from ATA working alongside and being that early stage support that some businesses like Richard's and Clive's might need as well. And I think it's beholden on all of us to make sure that this fund that we've got here in Cornwall, we are very fortunate to have it. And with people like you at the helm, hopefully we can get them out there and really make some impact. And with the evergreen aspects, make some impact forever for Cornwall. And I think that it's strange that perhaps this 2020 crisis becomes a point where the next normal is established, and that next normal, as I think we've all been saying from different perspectives, will play into Cornwall's hands in ways that the 20th century just didn't do. So I hope that this is a crucial part, and I hope that this morning has just encouraged people to understand what you're up to, and to help get those funds out there in meaningful ways for the economy of Cornwall, and honestly forever. So thank you very much indeed all of you for your time, and look forward to seeing you on the other side, as they say, in a a bigger room with a glass of wine or a cooked breakfast or something when we can get back to the bits that we like from the past, and then take that forward into the new normal. So look forward to seeing you all soon, and thanks once again.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.